Welcome to the Schmoopy Daddy streaming experience. I'm your host, as per usual, Schmoopy Daddy. It's the first time you're watching the stream, the VOD, or the video on YouTube. I'm a monthly Hearthstone Wild Legend player who typically hits Legend first of the month, and after that I goof off. When I goof off, I play your decks. And I'm going to get to that, sort of. But tonight what I mostly want to do is, since we're starting to run a little low on viewer decks, it does come in like waves where like people have a bunch of decks to submit, and then all of a sudden they slow down, and they're like, well... And I have a little bit of a lull, and I sort of fill in what I want to play. One of the things I want to play are Chinese meta decks that were brought up on a March 10th meta report. Now, something that I typically get as a rallying cry from chat is like, oh, it's from China. The meta must be really different. The game must be really different on the Chinese server. And it's kind of yes and no. The population's a lot larger. We can get a larger sample size a lot of times. But I think there's reason to believe that, especially in the meta right now, it's really not all that different. And I'm going to kind of poke holes in what I see as being a little bit peculiar in this particular report. So let's go through what people said in this report that were the best decks on the Chinese server, and whether or not that makes sense to us and to me personally. Start with like how they sort of like tier out their stuff. They usually have like S tier. They'll have a tier, and then they'll sort of slip it into high, middle, and lower. And sometimes, so like tier 2 right now has high tier 2, mid tier 2, low tier 2. I really don't functionally think there's much of a difference within a specific tier between high and low. You might be talking about a couple percentage points. I'm not sure how they break those down. I myself have a tough time distinguishing a lot of times what makes a tier 1 deck a high tier 1 deck or a low tier 1 deck. Tier 1 just sort of meaning it's a cut above the rest, as opposed to, in its performance, as opposed to some sort of like set metric. I don't know what metric they used. I don't speak Chinese, so I didn't read the report myself word for word, but I have some theories as to why things are broken down this way. I do think it's interesting, and it makes a lot of sense to me, that they put as the top of the heap, the best deck in the format, Reno Holy Wrath Paladin. If you haven't been overplannered into Holy Wrath by now, if you haven't had that pleasure of getting minus 100 on like a turn 5 or turn 6, you haven't lived yet, chat. But no, it makes a lot of sense. Reno Holy Wrath Paladin is a deck that has very few weak spots in the meta, has very few decks that it feels like it's unfavored against. Kind of in the style that Chinese players like to play. It feels like it's kind of good into everything. It feels like it should be kind of favored into aggro. It feels like it should be, it packs enough disruption you can beat combo decks. Other control decks, obviously, it's got a very much a I win button when you finally pull off your Holy Wrath combo with either, a Lucky Dredge or an Overplanner, or just like planning ahead and hitting what you want to hit. It's got that like that very much like I'm going to AFK and then I'm just going to end the game and win. Usually the Chinese community values a deck that's able to beat multiple decks. It also values a deck that has space to put in tech to cover its bad matchups. So, like, I've made a meme in the past where it's like the dude checking out another girl with his girl in his arm, and he's looking back and he's like, whoa. I've made this meme in the past that, like, Chinese Hearthstone players looking at Reno Paladin as she walks past, and Reno Priest is on her arm. Like, the darling of the community that loves to play those kind of pile-ish, Renathal, Tech W kind of piles of expensive cards with a lot of legendaries and then like a win con. That used to be Reno Priest to a T, and now it looks a lot more like Holy Wrath Paladin. So that doesn't shock me, as they would consider that the best deck in the format. Now, I think that's one of the best decks in the format, so I have no umbrage there, but it gets a little weirder the lower you go down. At low tier 1, we have APM Draka Druid and Pirate DH. Draka Rogue. You can win with it and not cheat. That is a thing that you can do. You can win with it and not cheat, but it's a lot easier to win with it if you are cheating. Considering that on the Chinese server and in just the Chinese community in general, botting and animation hacking is a little bit more socially acceptable. Let's say if you're using APM cheats, Draka Rogue does in fact seem like it's tier 1. It pops off anywhere from tier 3 to tier 5. It's very hard to stop, but it is easy to disrupt. There are some minions that if you just, coin rat on one, you can win the game because they can't bounce it back into their hand. It's a very weird deck to go up against. It's the kind of deck that honestly would have been nerfed in the past, but I think because it's so fragile, because so few people play it, doesn't seem to be on the board right now as far as balance adjustments go. The other head scratcher is Pirate Demon Hunter. I have a theory, and I've spoken about this theory before because, there have been a couple streams and a couple times where I've been forced to play Pirate Warrior in the not so distant past. And I play against Libram Paladins playing as Pirate Warrior. Or really Pirate anything. What I've come to realize is anything Pirate anything is kind of favored into Libram Paladin. People talk about Libram Paladin as being this big bad and a noob stomper, and it definitely is, but something that it definitely has a weakness of is it has a very weak turns 1 through 3. Your best play on turn 1 as a Libram Paladin is either slamming a Dire Mole or playing a Christology to go get your 2 Dire Moles. And then your turn 2 is essentially like play a Dire Mole, maybe buff it by +1/+1. Maybe you coin a weapon. Turn 3, I think your best one is equipping a weapon. Just not a whole lot happening. You're not going very wide. You're not going very tall. And what ends up happening is you can kind of, in this very critical state, start racing the Libram Paladin or start pushing them off board so that they're not buffing anything and they're not getting their bigger minions that require playing lots of either holy spells or paladin cards from getting out onto the board, right? The longer we delay the light rays, the longer we delay the giants, the less threatening the Libram Paladin is, right? It doesn't get real until those things start coming down. And so seeing something like Pirate DH is doing well doesn't really shock me. Seeing it as considered as low tier 1, I don't know about that. You're talking about a deck that's not only just like, yeah, it's a pirate deck, but it is a nerfed pirate deck. And the cards that are nerfed for Pirate DH, like Sigil Skydiving, is a hell of a card to have nerfed. Can it have those explosive pirate openers into like mana burn, into like Hosen, into like second mana burn, so that you're taking those crappy turn 1 through 3s that the Libram Paladin is having and then extending them out even further? And then you're snowballing on top of that and you're just dominating Libram Paladins that way? Yeah, you could sell me on that. Yeah, I could see that. But being tier 1, I don't know about that. I don't think it's good enough. Even as an aggro deck where it's shown that it's sort of resilient and it's more of a mid-range deck. It kind of like, honestly, it gets a lot of, it shares a lot of the same qualities as a Libram Paladin itself, where Libram Paladin has been decent in the meta because it just sort of sticks around with, Librams of Divinity and just constantly giving stuff +6/+6/+6/+6 every turn until your opponent either runs out of removal or they find a way to out-tempo you. Pirate DH is similar because it just keeps making shitters, and eventually, cards like Kurtrus end up finishing the game, or cards like, combination of Treasure Distributor and some of the locations and the little shitter pirate tokens with charge to get, buffed up and they go face. You can kind of get there that way. So they both are sort of like diehards, but I would not consider Pirate DH tier 1. But I have some reasons for why I think it's here. Libram Paladin, XL Shadow Priest, Questline DH, Reno Hunter, Big Shaman as high tier 2. I have no issue with these decks being considered high tier 2 versus like low tier 1. I don't think there's much to distinguish them from, let's say, the Holy Wrath Paladin. I think the Questline DH is great if you're playing against slow stuff. If you're playing against a significant amount of aggro, you can high roll the aggro, but being at 30 health and being that it explodes if you put Void Touch Attendant on 1, I'm not that convinced. Seeing Reno Hunter, again, this is a community that values decks that can sort of have a chance to win against anything even if it's not particularly dominant against anything. And that fits Reno Hunter to a T. I think right now Reno Hunter is a better position than even Reno Priest because of some of the decks, some of the cards that it has, available to it. You can run the Okanis, you can run the Razor Scales. You could do the sort of like, let me slow down my opponent by taxing them, let me slow down my opponent by out-tempoing them. But Hunter got a nice little buff from the Zerg cards, and so now we're also dropping Kerrigan, getting some extra burst that way. Reno Hunter and just Hunter in general feels pretty strong to me at the moment, and so like kind of cool to see this here. Not totally shocking. Maybe a stretch. Maybe this belongs in Tier 2, and not with something that I would think would be Tier 1 like the XL Shadow Priest. Big Shaman is just a decent climbing deck, but I think it's been feeling weaker and weaker, especially as the expansion's gone on, and we have found ways to do other things with other decks that, unless you're getting high rolled by the Big Shaman with Walking Mountain, you can kind of stall and sort of get there. 30 Shadow Priest has shown to be fine in the meta, and it's especially good into the combo decks versus XL Shadow Priest, which can be not necessarily on average as fast as 30 Shagro. 30 Shagro can still be a little bit faster than XL Aggro Shadow Priest, but XL Aggro Shadow Priest has way more value and sort of hangs in games for a lot longer. Malygos Druid, fantastic deck. I think belongs in Tier 1, but I think because it's also a little bit weaker into... it's a combo deck, so it's a little bit weaker into some of the disruption, and it can be weaker into the Shadow Priests. It's not seeing a lot of love here. Questline Warlock, I'm surprised to see so low, but really it's dead in the water against combo decks. Unless your Questline Warlock is running Rats or Okani or something to disrupt a combo deck, it's dead in the water versus those. Even though I think it's shored up a lot of its matchups aggro-wise, it's better in aggro than it's ever been. You can't just like aggro it down anymore. I don't think that's possible. And I think also that it's still very good into slow stuff, except maybe not Holy Wrath Paladin, because again, that like combo finish, you can outrace the mass productions with that. Mid-range Hunter, which is what I'm assuming is like your like Jormungandr Hunter, they're calling mid Tier 2. That's fine. I think stats wise, it's looked Tier 1 and continue to look Tier 1 on HS Guru. But if you want to call it mid Tier 2, yeah, sure. Like functionally, it's the same shit. XL Hostage Mage. I'm surprised they have Hostage Mage this low. I think Hostage Mage has almost nothing but positive matchups almost across the meta spectrum. Like there's some tricky things like Mill Druid or something like that that are not things that Hostage Mage wants to play against. But at the same time, Hostage Mage mostly loses to tech cards. And since the Chinese community loves loading up their decks with cards that will help them infringe matchups, I'm imagining that Hostage Mage is suffering a little bit from getting whacked by that. Holy Wrath Paladin, just normal dupes Holy Wrath Paladin, mid-tier 2. Yeah, it doesn't shock me. I don't know if the yellow cards end it and make it that much less consistent than Reno Holy Wrath Paladin. In theory, this would be more consistent and even faster, but I think running powerful cards like Zephyrus the Great and Reno Lone Ranger, still sort of helping to put Reno Holy Wrath Paladin over the top. Just being able to drop one card and heal for 39 if need be, sure. Hooktusk Rogue? Hooktusk Rogue is one of those decks that's good into Hostage Mage. It's good into some of the slower stuff. It has that Pirate Opener, so you can kind of overwhelm Libram Paladins. Note that it's much lower than Libram Paladin because it doesn't do that very consistently, but it's still a solid deck. Mid-tier 2, yeah, fine. Low tier 2, Barnes Ysael Druid. This almost feels tier 3 for me right now. There's a lot more 40 decks, and there's a lot more Rats and Disruption in the meta. And so a deck that I think that is catching a lot of strays right now is Barnes Druid. I don't feel very confident playing Barnes Druid into the meta. If I'm going to play something, I'd rather play Mechathune or I'd rather play Malygos Druid because it just doesn't feel like Barnes really has enough juice right now. Alexstrasza Rogue is actually strictly slower than Draka Rogue right now, so that's why I think it's getting the low tier 2 treatment. It's just like, the slower of the Rogue combo decks. Reno Warlock, insert Tech W. I think sometimes it gets aggroed down because it doesn't have enough consistent clears for it to be, a bigger player in the meta, but like it can disrupt almost anything and it can kind of high roll, but, it still loses to something, let's say, like XL Questline Warlock. Reno Shadow Priest, I mean, this is going to drop way lower. But it's just worth worse Holy Wrath Paladin at this point. Like, it's not actually knocking you out for a knockout punch. And it's slower than the combo decks. Its matchup spread, it's not nearly as positive as even Reno Hunter across the spectrum. So I'm fine with this where it is. Pirate Rogue, you want to tell me it's low tier 2? Yeah, that makes sense. I've been burst down by some Pirate Rogues. I think that's probably an underplayed deck in the meta, honestly, because it's probably pretty decent into Libram Paladins very quietly. Reno DK, interesting. Reno Warrior. Reno Warrior, I think, has been an unsung possible off-meta darling in the meta right now, because I think Reno Warrior can hate on, let's say, the Libram Paladins and the XL Shadow Priests a little bit more effectively. You can run enough disruption that you're okay into the combos, and you can run enough greed that you're kind of okay into slow stuff. Really, like, you could do something like you can have the Velen combo so that you have an unkillable taunt, and then also put up your Bulwark, and now Reno Holy Wrath Paladin can't Holy Wrath you. Like, there's some like little cute things that you can do with Reno Warrior that makes it a lot better. I think the deck gets a lot better with the reverts, especially the ones that we saw today. This is a sort of a deck that, if I was going to play something a little bit different that I thought might be okay in the meta, I would give this a shot. A lot of people play Mildruid. I think like there's too many bad matchups for Mildruid in the meta, but the ones that are good, like I think I would probably take the Mildruid into Hostage Mage, for example. Those feel good. Reno Shaman is Reno Shaman. Reno Druid. Like, you know, in both cases, you're just trying to set up a situation where you're outvaluing the opponent. So what do I think is happening here? Because these are some like somewhat weird placements towards the top, and then everything else kind of makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of variety and there's a lot of parity in the meta right now, I think, regardless of what server you play on. I don't think the Chinese server is any different than that. I think just sometimes our perspectives are a little bit different, and what we value as players is a little bit different. I personally would still have Hostage Mage up there as in the discussion as a top deck. Malygos Druid up there in discussion as a top deck. Shadow Priest up there as XL Shadow Priest up there as a discussion for a top deck. I think Libram Paladin is kind of perfectly placed where they have it. It's like that deck that a lot of decks need to beat if they're going to be anywhere near interesting in the meta, but it's not the end all be all, and I think it's far from the best deck in Wild, especially because there are some matchups that actually like punk it right now. So KVLD brought up a really interesting point, because I was sort of talking with him and a couple other players, like, well, how do we get this then? How do we get that Pirate DH as tier 1? And his hypothesis was like, well, like, what if somebody isn't very good at sample size and data collection and is just going straight by win rate? Like, what if we were just sorting by win rate, regardless of whether or not something has a 0.1% play rate or has like a 10% play rate? If you have a couple of really good players on Pirate DH, and Pirate DH gets a solid like low tier 1 win rate, now it's tier 1. Do I think it's worth a tier 1 win rate? No, probably not. Not that many people play APM Draka Rogue, especially not at a very high level, because, you know, I think to play it at a high level, to get, you know, a dagger over like 41, 40 plus, you usually have to cheat. Right? Like, there are some records that have been kind of crazy. I've heard of a dagger in the 60s that was done with no cheats. Sure, but like, to win consistently, you have to cheat. So that win rate might be a little bit inflated at a low sample size. And if you go by that, then I think things look a little bit more interesting, especially if you check out something like HS Guru, or I shudder to say HS Replay, where you start breaking down the decks, and the deck win rates don't always line up by what I end up saying is that the top players say are the best decks. So, I don't know. Something worth noting is that it's probably all just like how you sort the data and whether or not you trust the sample that you have or in the win rate that you have. But I'm going to include in this video the deck lists that were included. Again, you'll find like a lot of them are kind of goofy, like Glides in Pirate DH. Some sort of silly lists that, again, are kind of like, Glide is a great card if you're seeing a lot of Hostage Mages. It's not a great card if you're seeing a lot of other aggro decks. And so you're going to see some sort of pet cards and wacky lists that are sort of hedging against bad matchups. And so you could try those out. There's 33 decks on the sheet. I didn't even load them all up tonight because I was just like, this is too many. I'll just roll from here. So if you enjoyed this content, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing on my YouTube